So please let me introduce you, Vicky Cox. Vicky is in the animal advocacy research analyst. Oh, sorry, it's getting too late for me. Vicky is the animal advocacy research analyst at Charity Entrepreneurship, being hired after going through the 2019 Incubation Program. She went vegan and became interested in effective altruism in 2016 after reading works by Peter Singer. In her presentation, she will talk about charity entrepreneurship, research, and recommended charities. So please welcome Vicky Cox, and Vicky, the stage is yours.
Cool, thank you. Thanks for the introduction. Yeah, that mostly introduces me. I'll just introduce Charity Entrepreneurship for those that don't know who we are. So Charity Entrepreneurship is a research and training program. So we help start new organizations. So for 10 months of the year, we're doing research, and that's my end of the roles in C. And for 2 months of the year, we do an incubation program. So this is where we find people and train people up to start the charities that we think are promising. So obviously, this is Care Conference, so I'm going to be talking about the animal charities that we recommend, but we also recommend charities in different cause areas such as family planning, global poverty, and mental health as well. So to start off with, I thought it would be good to just briefly outline the research process that we use when trying to find charity ideas that we wish to recommend. So yeah, this is the first aim of my presentation. Hopefully going through this, you'll get a sense of how we've come to the different ideas that I'm going to talk about at the end. And I'll go through the different steps that we use and then highlight some main takeaways that you could use for your own research. So obviously our research is quite unique in that it's specifically dedicating to recommending new charities for people to start, but I think it's got some cross-applicable useful lessons for other research too. So the first step that we use is generating ideas. So we generate around 300 ideas for each intervention. And during this, we just do broad reading. We reach out to experts to get their perspective on different ideas. We look at what existing organizations are doing. You know, Care Conference is a good way to find what different people are doing and gather ideas, talking to people about ideas they might have or be interested in seeing. And yeah, this is the first step, and you can see there 25 hours spent doing this. So the second step is then sorting through these 300 ideas. So this is probably the most daunting part of the whole process. Definitely sounds scary when you think of it like this. But we go through 4 main methodologies that we use throughout our whole research process. And at this stage, we use these methodologies for 5 minutes per idea. So first of all, we have the cost-effective analyses. So this is trying to measure how much good is done for a given cost given to a charity. So this could be like animal lives saved per dollar, or pig years saved per dollar and stuff like this. This is just to get a rough sense of how much impact we think this charity might have. And then we have the expert view. So this involves conducting interviews with experts broadly informed in the cause area. So we reached out to around 5 or 6 experts who had a broad knowledge of the animal advocacy movement to try and get their perspective on ranking these 300 ideas that we had. So this would involve asking questions such as, would you prefer seeing work on farmed animals or wild animals? Would you prefer seeing work in Asia or more in the US? And like what specific animals they'd like to see work being done on. And this was as well helping us to cut down through these ideas. Then we have the weighted factor model. So this involves looking at the evidence base for each of the ideas that we have, looking at any potential externalities these ideas might have. And this is the main section where we try and quantify how difficult we think it might be to start these ideas, as obviously we're looking at these ideas from the perspective of starting a charity. And then we have informed consideration. So this basically just involves a whole load of reading around animal advocacy in general to try and see whether there's any particular ideas that we see cropping up again and again that we think would be particularly important to start. So this might be, we're seeing a lot of movement towards fish now. Obviously, we also helped start Fish Welfare Initiative. So it's, looking through broad ideas to try and find which we think would be most impactful. And this is trying to read between the lines of what the other methodologies might not pick out. So once we've sorted through these ideas during 5 minutes using this methodology, we then do our idea prioritization process. So we've cut down from our 300 ideas to the most promising 10 to 30% of ideas. So these are selected for each course area, and a 2-hour report is created for them. The methodology we used for the 2-hour section of this for animal advocacy was the weighted factor model. So this was more research into the evidence base for animals, the potential externalities, and a big portion of this was looking at what animal advocacy organizations are already doing, so we're not perhaps moving funding away from them or duplicating work already done, to try and get a sense of which of the ideas that we've left with, around 22, would be most promising to start. And then once we have our top ideas, we do an 80-hour report on them. So this is like the longest section of the research process and takes the most time and is the most in-depth. And again, we're using the same 4-stage process as outlined in step 2. So I'll briefly just go over what that looks like for the 80-hour process. So for the cost-effective analyses, we spend 20 hours building a massive cost-effective analyses, trying to capture all the specific direct and indirect effects we think that a potential intervention could have. And this will be less abstract when I talk about the actual ideas. You'll be able to get more of a sense of that. And then we have the expert view. So this would involve contacting around 5 experts for each intervention idea that's left in the 80-hour stage. And this would involve talking to animal advocates, perhaps people from the industry. We've managed to talk to some farmers, talking to government representatives and people, other industry representatives, to try and get like a diverse set of opinions on the intervention ideas that we're looking at. For the weighted factor model, this is more evidence-based research, trying to look at what the potential externalities are again. And this is the main bit where we try and get a sense of whether, even though something might be a really good idea, it might be a super difficult charity to start, an idea to start a charity around. So we're trying to get a sense of whether it would be good to recommend someone start this through our incubation program. And then we finally have the informed considerations research stage. So this would involve doing crucial considerations research. So again, trying to capture something that might not be highlighted in any other section of the research process that might rule this charity out from being started. So say we're wanting to do something for insects, perhaps the crucial consideration would be that we're unsure on their sentience. And that might rule out the possibility of us doing an intervention for them. So this year we looked through 6 main ideas and we've recommended 3, but one of those ideas was from last year's research process as well. Okay, so that's briefly the process we use. Now I'm just going to highlight some key takeaways from our research process that I think could be applied across other research processes. So the first is iterative depth. You notice here that we went through various steps, and at each stage we were cutting down the amount of charity ideas that we were focusing on. So we researched the same ideas in multiple rounds of iterative depth. This means that we're not spending our time and resources researching an idea that perhaps doesn't look very promising. So it's like a good prioritization of where to spend your time and how much time to give a certain idea. The next section is that our research process tries to be quite systematic. So the goal of our research is to compare ideas for a possible charity to found. Obviously yours might be different, but I think in any case, it would be good to keep comparisons between different ideas consistent so that the methodology is uniform across all the things you're researching. So this means that there's the same level of rigor is applied to each idea, and the same kind of questions and factors are evaluated for each idea as well, making them more easy to compare, but also ensuring that you haven't spent, say, 2 hours looking into one idea and it looks really promising versus 80 hours looking into another idea that doesn't look as promising, but perhaps the one that you've only spent 2 hours on would look less promising if you spent more time on it. The next is a cluster approach. So this is comparing different intervention ideas from multiple different perspectives. So as you could tell, I was talking about 4 methodologies throughout each section of our research process. So this is because the fact that we're not confident in one single methodology. So to increase the robustness of our conclusions, we prefer to look at these ideas from multiple different angles to check that they still look promising and perform well on lots of angles. So this might be the fact that something looks, super cost effective to do, but speaking with an expert, they think that perhaps, they wouldn't want to see an animal organization working on this because they think they're already working on this and perhaps we could work on something else or something like this. And then the last key takeaway from our research process is to try and keep your research always decision relevant. So our research is highly specialized and focused on the one key aspect of what charities we want to recommend this year. So we only research topics that are directly related to the end-line choice that we're trying to make, the end-line question we're trying to answer. So I know it would be tempting maybe when you're researching something and you find something particularly interesting to go down a rabbit hole and get lost in the main question that you're trying to answer. But trying to keep the main question in mind will ensure that you don't stay off track and you keep the main consideration that you're trying to answer in mind always. So now I've outlined our research process. I'll now talk about the top animal charities that we're recommending this year. So in fact, our incubation program is currently on right now. So we're hoping that these animal ideas will in fact turn into a charity. We're hoping to start at least one animal charity this year. And those charities that don't get started this year will be rolled over to next year. So potentially anybody watching that's interested, you might be able to start one of these ideas too. I'll talk more about the incubation program at the end if you're interested. So as I said, we've got 3 main ideas that we're hoping to recommend this year. So this is food fortification, animal research, and shrimp welfare. So I'll now talk more deeply about each of these ideas. So the first is feed fortification. And basically what this is it would be supplementing egg-laying hen feed with vital nutrients that they need to ensure that their legs aren't breaking. So with the high calcium demand of egg-laying in factory farming, the egg-laying hens' calcium demand is extremely high and usually isn't met by the traditional feed that's fed to them on farms. So this would involve working with farmers or perhaps legislating such that chicken feed has the correct level of nutrients. So the nutrients that we think would be particularly important for this are calcium, phosphorus, and vitamin D3. So calcium and phosphorus are helping bones to be stronger, have a higher breaking strength so they don't get fractures or their bones breaking. And then vitamin D3 is kind of a vitamin that helps the absorption of these minerals. So we're particularly excited about this charity due to the historical level of success of micronutrient charities in the poverty space. And we think this is like a unique and currently neglected area of animal welfare, the feed nutrition side of welfare. So the way that we've modeled this is that we thought that perhaps we could work directly with farmers to make these improvements. In fact, we thought this could be particularly promising in India. So during our expert view part of our research process, we reached out to a lot of farmers and animal advocates, and we found that India could be a particularly promising place for this charity to start, given the fact that the current feed standards in India are a lot further away from optimal than they could be. So we could work with farmers to subsidize these key nutrients such that their hens aren't suffering with these bone breakages. This would also be particularly important in areas where chickens are being moved out of cages, as obviously having broken bones is obviously awful all the time, but if they no longer have these broken bones, they'd be allowed to move around freely and access their feed and drink and maybe express some of their natural behaviors when they're out of cages, such as dust bathing and perching. So feed fortification here has the strongest evidence base of all interventions we've considered. So what this means is that we found a lot of scientific evidence that supplementing these 3 nutrients would be a particularly cost-effective way of improving the level of calcium in the bones such that these bone breakages don't happen. Here you can see the theory of change for this intervention. So as I've mentioned here, we'd be looking at subsidizing farmers, and this would lead to feed being fortified, increasing the bone strength and tibial breaking strength of egg-laying hens, reducing the incidence of osteoporosis, bone fractures and breakages, decreasing their mortality by quite a significant margin as well, and then hens being able to freely move around and express their natural behaviors. So I guess one limitation of this is that a lot of this is done from desk research. So this is our best guess of like the approach that would work well. And we've modeled here subsidization, as we thought that would be a particularly, so that's probably like the most expensive way to help animals by directly just giving farmers money. And if it looked promising from that angle, then perhaps it could be promising to work on from other approaches as well. So this might be working with certifiers who are already certifying egg-laying hen farms to get them to include the optimal levels of these 3 nutrients in their standards, or working with governments to get them to either subsidize farmers to supplement their feed or to improve the feed standards in their countries. We think that these could be particularly interesting approaches that could be tried out, but that subsidizing farmers is a good guess. One limitation here when working with chickens is that we perhaps wouldn't want to do a corporate campaign yet, so as to not hinder the progress of the Better Chicken Commitment or the Cage-Free Commitment, as it could be quite confusing to corporations if there's a new organization coming in and asking for a different thing. So we've highlighted that this approach does not look promising yet, but that subsidizing farmers in the meantime or working with certifiers, etc., could be a promising thing to do. And as I say, it looks particularly promising in India, but it seems to be the case that the nutrient levels on feed standards across the world aren't optimized for welfare, as you may expect. So it could be promising anywhere. So the next is ask research. So this is quite a jargony term, but basically an ask is something like the cage-free commitment. It's something that we demand of corporations or governments for animal welfare. So ask research would be trying to determine and work with animal organizations to determine what ask they're hoping to work on next. Perhaps they're trying to decide between 2 different asks and doing any research that we can to try and help them make a better informed decision on this ask. So this may involve, as I mentioned, going to existing organizations and asking them which asks they're trying to decide between, conducting research to see which of those we think would be most impactful, and then recommending that they do this ask instead of one of the other asks that they were considering doing. So we thought that this could be particularly promising as there seems to be limited research on historical asks, which suggests there might be room for more research in the future. I think it could be particularly promising as well as kind of work as a advisor and contractor to these organizations to try and fill any knowledge gaps that they have. It also seems like this could be particularly tractable and fairly quick to progress on. So although asks are probably not decided on very frequently, it would be very high impact to choose a higher impact ask than a lower impact ask. So just doing this, it could even just be an 80-hour report like we do at Charity Entrepreneurship, and making the impact much higher than it would have been otherwise. And also, so there's room for a lot of impact, but then considering cost effectiveness, there's also a very low cost to a research organization. So this would mean that it could be particularly cost effective, as given the low cost of a research organization and the possibilities to significantly affect a corporate campaign, this could be extremely high impact and cost effective. So obviously the key things for this charity to think of is communications with animal organizations and ensuring that they're doing research that is useful to them in making their decisions. And then we have the final is shrimp welfare. So this is probably the weirdest idea that we have. It was born out of the fact that Fish Welfare Initiative, who were founded out of last year's incubation program, are doing particularly well. So we thought perhaps we could do similar work for crustaceans, and we've kind of moved off from that idea. So this initially started as we thought we could do Fish Welfare Initiative for crustaceans, which would be perhaps working on water quality for crustaceans. And we've moved from this to broadly recommending work on shrimp welfare. So initially we thought we had crustaceans, but we didn't know which crustacean. So part of our crucial considerations research was trying to determine which crustacean we should be working on. So even though shrimp have a lower chance of sentience than something like a lobster or any other brig crustacean, despite this fact, even given their scale, they look particularly promising to work on. So then we knew that we wanted to work on shrimp welfare. We had to decide what kind of ask we wanted to work on. So initially we had the idea of working on water quality, as we thought this was particularly promising given our research on Fish Welfare Initiative. And so we were looking through the evidence base of shrimp welfare in regards to water quality, which admittedly is quite small, as I think shrimp aren't the first animals you think of when wanting to improve their welfare. And we found that dissolved oxygen was looked to be the most evidence-based, as in there's the most scientific studies found looking at the improvements in certain welfare indicators. So that might be mortality rates, lower disease rates, etc., suggesting that dissolved oxygen was one of the most promising water quality indicators to work on. So working from there, then we wanted to decide on the approach we'd be working on. So similarly with the feed fortification, we thought that subsidization could be a good bar for this charity to try and reach. If it looked promising from a subsidization approach, then it might be promising for other approaches in the future. So here, the subsidization approach for dissolved oxygen would be perhaps buying aeration equipment for farmers, or potentially paying for the cost of electricity for running this aeration equipment. Or potentially just training farmers in how to use aeration equipment optimally for welfare if costs weren't the main issue. Also, the subsidization approach was chosen as we thought Vietnam would be a particularly promising country to work in. So we were quite lucky with our experts that we managed to get in contact with for this intervention, as we managed to get in contact with someone from the Ministry of Agriculture in Vietnam and talk to them about this intervention and whether they thought it would be a particularly promising intervention given their experience with farmers, and whether they thought that farmers would be willing to work with a new organisation on this approach. And it did seem that dissolved oxygen was a particular limiting factor for these farmers. So it could be, they would definitely be keen to work on improving dissolved oxygen with a new organisation. So this was a really good update for us that that this intervention would be particularly promising, as Vietnam looks like a country that would be willing to work with a new organisation to improve welfare. So yeah, and then given that we'd be working in Vietnam, perhaps a corporate campaign wouldn't look as viable given the current structure that exists in Vietnam. Their corporate structure isn't as similar as we're used to in the corporate campaigns we've been working on so far in the West. So perhaps that wouldn't be a possibility. And although the governmental approach is often utilized by existing organizations in Vietnam, perhaps we'd be worried about the enforcement of that. So relating to the previous talk on using law to help animals, potentially enforcement might be the limiting factor here. So again, we thought subsidization was a promising way to go. So we've modeled subsidization here and think that working on this working on dissolved oxygen, we've mapped about 10 years of a charity working here would mean that 720 million shrimp would be affected. So that's like a unimaginably large number, and obviously not to be taken too literally, as it's my best guess given my modelling in my cost-effective analyses, but there's definitely a huge scale that could be affected with shrimp welfare here. And yeah, once we'd done most of this modelling, we realised that perhaps just focusing on dissolved oxygen was too broad of an approach for this charity. Perhaps we should be looking at different potential interventions as well. So we kind of shifted the focus from dissolved oxygen just to ultimately improving the welfare of shrimp. So another potentially promising intervention here could be preventing the use of eye stalk ablation. So for those of you that don't know, eye stalk ablation is something that is used in shrimp and prawn farms. It's where they either cut off or create just a cut in the eye stalk of shrimp and prawns to try and improve their fertility. So this is used in commercial shrimp farms as the conditions that they're kept in mean that they don't produce enough eggs to meet the demand of these factory farms, so they've had to use this horrific method of eye stalk ablation to try and increase the number of shrimp and eggs that are produced. We think that this could be a really promising intervention for shrimp, actually, given the fact that it could be a foot in the door for shrimp welfare. Obviously, shrimp welfare is probably a bit further down the line for the animal movement as a whole, given the fact that it's been hard to get people to sympathize with chickens, and fish are the next animal we're probably going to focus on, and it's also been hard to get them on board with fish, and shrimp are just a whole other question. But we thought that something particularly horrific as eye stalk ablation could be a good foot in the door to get people to start expanding their moral circle to shrimps. So the end line decision here for this organisation is which of these interventions they think could be most promising. And we think here that the main decision will be basically going to Vietnam or another shrimp producing country to try and determine for themselves whether they think work on eye stalk ablation, dissolved oxygen, or even another potentially promising intervention. So Rethink Priorities are doing research at the moment as well on shrimp and prawns. So they, I think, are going to be useful as well to see other potentially promising interventions for shrimp. Yes, so that's our charity ideas. And then, as I mentioned at the start, we our incubation program is on currently. So at least one of these charity ideas is going to be started this year, but it's definitely likely that one or at least two of these charity ideas are also going to be open for people to start next year. So our incubation program is a 2-month-long program. This year it's been remote, obviously, because of the pandemic, but we're hoping that next year we'll be able to have it in person. And if you're interested, you can email me or visit our website where you can find out more. It usually takes place from June to August, so we spend 10 months researching these ideas and then 2 months for this incubation program. Yes, and we currently have an ebook, a new ebook up on our website, like it's the lessons that we'd be teaching in our incubation program. So this could be like particularly useful for anyone who's running an organization. Okay, that's it from my end. I think I'm good for questions.
Okay, thank you, Vicky. We have 20 minutes for questions. So okay. I would like to remind you all to post your questions through Slido. You can also vote for the questions you found most interesting and would like to hear answers for. It's quite probable we can get through all of those. So just get on it. We already have a couple of questions here. So let's start with the first one from Thomas. What are some potentially promising areas for new charities that CE hasn't fully researched yet?
Yeah, so I think there's potentially two areas that we were close to recommending this year that we didn't end up recommending based on the incubatees that we had. Didn't feel like these particular niches, but two particularly promising areas could be working for turkeys. So we outlined that footpad burn in turkeys, which is basically, it's similar to what broiler chickens and egg-laying hens get as well. They get lesions on their feet from the fact that there's so many of them packed in quite densely that they're, in their own urine, and the litter is quite moist all the time. So this like rubs on their feet and they get painful lesions and sores on their feet. So we think working with farmers or working with certifiers to try and prevent these footpad burns, either by demanding certain quality litter, the amount of litter quality changes, or like setting a particular level that these footpad lesions can reach whilst the farm's still being certified by a certifier or something, could be particularly promising, as turkeys are currently quite neglected in the animal movement. I think we mostly think about them during Thanksgiving, but obviously it's an ongoing problem throughout the whole year, these turkeys being farmed. So I think any intervention for turkeys could be particularly promising given their neglect. But this footpad burn intervention could be particularly promising. And then another intervention, I guess, outside of farmed animals, more in the wild animals section, could be banning the sale and use of glue traps for rodents. So people who don't know what these are basically sticky glue boards that are used for rodent control. So similar to like a snap trap or something, they're laid down in a house where you've seen like a rat or a mice, and so they get stuck in this sticky glue surface and they remain there until they either die of starvation. Sometimes they accidentally get their mouth in the glue and then die of suffocation. It's just a particularly horrific method of pest control, although obviously pest control itself is particularly horrific. But I think, yeah, this is definitely one of the worst methods of pest control that's used. So I think trying to ban the sale and use of these glue traps could be particularly promising. And it's really surprising that there's only been 3 countries where these are banned. They're still on sale in the UK, in the US, loads of countries in Europe. So yeah, that could be particularly promising as well.
Thank you. Next question, what kind of support does Charity Entrepreneurship provides for teams starting new charities?
Yeah, so we provide the 2-month incubation program. So this is kind of training on all the things we think you'll need to know for starting an organization. So this would be things from like management, hiring and firing, how to like operations work, financial work as well. We also help you find a co-founder. So we let in like around 20 people to the incubation program each year, and we pair you up with people that you have worked with throughout these 2 months, and you will start this charity together. So it's like not a process that you do alone. You spend these 2 months working with similar people with similar interests and passions as you, and help you get this pairing to start this organization with these people. Or we can also help you find a promising co-founder outside of the program if you're not clicking with any of the participants. We also offer like a seed grant. So this could be $50,000 to $100,000 usually. So this is like initial seed funding to help get new charities off the ground, so they don't have to focus on fundraising right away. They can focus on impact for animals. We also offer like you'd be an umbrella under our organization. So you'd be like an umbrella under Charity Entrepreneurship. So again, for the first year, we just provide this support where you don't really have to do the operations work for yourself. So, you don't need to do the like operations tasks for yourselves. We'll do that for you in the first year whilst you're registering as your own organization in your country of choice. So this might be the country that you're choosing to work in. So say Vietnam for the shrimp charity. We'll provide all the like legal support and everything whilst you're figuring that out.
Okay, thank you. Another question, this is a double. Does CE have a position on the momentum versus complacency, crucial consideration in terms of welfare reforms? And the second question, which apparently answers the first one, why do you reject the complacency argument?
Okay. Yeah, so I guess, yeah, our recommended interventions ideas are particularly welfare focused this year, but last year we helped to start animal advocacy careers. So we're definitely interested in the movement building side of animal advocacy and moving away from just particularly recommending welfare interventions themselves. We're definitely interested in more movement building side, and this would definitely be something we'd be interested in looking into in the future as well. We think the research organization as well could be you know, as more of a meta organization rather than a direct implementation organization. So helping inform existing organizations already doing this welfare work to increase their impact or answer any unknowns that they might have. I don't know if that's completely answered your question, sorry. But...
Okay, let's hope you did. Thank you. Next question, how many animal charities have Charity Entrepreneurship started?
Yeah, so we've currently started 2 organizations. So this was in our last year incubation program. We helped to start animal advocacy careers. So they had their talks today before I did. They're helping with movement building in the animal advocacy space. So they're trying like various experiments currently. They're currently focused on like careers advice and management training. And then we have Fish Welfare Initiative, who actually have their talk tomorrow. I think they're in room B at 3 p.m. I don't know if that's quite right, but yeah, Fish Welfare Initiative, who are one of the first organizations particularly focusing just on fish. So they're like trying out different fish interventions to try and inform a wider movement with a particular focus, I think, at first on these water quality issues, but yeah, definitely open to working on all approaches, trying to try things out whilst the animal movement are closing on their like chicken work before moving to fish themselves.
Thank you. The next question is from Artur's. Are there some surprising underappreciated and significant indirect effects that you found?
Yeah. So yeah, that's quite interesting. So with the shrimp welfare charity, the focus on water quality actually could have some indirect effects that we definitely wouldn't promote. So there is the worry that when working on water quality, we could in fact like help farmers to improve their welfare such that they could increase stocking densities. So if the farmers are seeing water quality as a limiting factor to increasing their production, then helping them overcome this barrier could be net bad if we increase stocking densities. One particular way that we thought we could get around this would be making our subsidization, so like our giving of aeration equipment conditional on the fact that they don't increase their stocking densities, or of course working on another intervention such as eye stalk ablation. It's in fact one of the main reasons as well why we thought we should broaden the scope of this shrimp charity from shrimp dissolved oxygen to just broadly shrimp welfare. So eye stalk ablation doesn't have these increased stocking density effects that dissolved oxygen does.
Thank you. Next question. Which of those charities you presented will be the most probably founded this year? Who makes the final decision? So this is a double question.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm unsure. I think it's probably, we're definitely hoping to recommend to start 1, potentially 2, as I mentioned. The final decision is made by the co-founders of Charity Entrepreneurship and the people who have been working with the incubatees during the 2-month incubation program. So they've been doing one-on-one calls with each incubatee, seeing what charity ideas they're most interested in starting, who they're most interested in working with, and trying to pair these such that good charities can get started. So yeah, this decision is made by the co-founders based on what the participants are most interested in working on, given that other people also want to start the same charity. So it's trying to pair different things to try and get these charities to start. As I said, we're unsure yet, as the incubation program is still on, which of these will be started for sure, but definitely one will. So there'll definitely be one animal idea that could be started next year that isn't this year, but potentially 2 will be left over to start. I think this year people have been more keen on the meta charity, so the research charity, than the direct implementation charities, but yeah, I'm unsure which has started yet. They've not started yet, so.
Thank you. Next question is from Steen, or Steen, not sure about the right pronunciation. Do you also evaluate wild animal welfare charity ideas, including wild animals whose suffering might not be caused by humans?
Yeah. So yeah, we did have a lot of wild animal ideas initially on the 300 ideas at the start of the process. Some of these made it to the top 10 to 30%. But the wild animal idea that was most promising was definitely this glue traps idea. So yeah, I guess the main concern with the wild animals that we don't interact with, say like rodents, is that we don't yet know what can definitely be done to improve their welfare, as we perhaps don't understand what their welfare needs are yet. So I think maybe at this stage doing research would be more promising than a direct implementation organization. Other than, definitely this glue traps idea looks super promising in the wild animal space. I'm trying to think what wild animal charities looked promising with animals that we don't interact with. I think, yeah, it was more on the research side than the direct implementation side.
Okay, thank you. Next question, how many of the incubees go on to form a charity? And is it useful to apply for CE if you are also considering starting a for-profit startup?
Yeah, so last year it was 100% of the incubatees went on to start charities. This year, I don't think it will be 100%, but it will be close. So a lot of that will come down to during the 2-month program, you're kind of assessing your own fit for whether you want to become a charity entrepreneur. Obviously, it's like a super diverse job, and that's really interesting for some people, but for other people, it could be quite daunting. They might want more stability. Also kind of depends what kind of position you're in your life, with whether you're willing to take the risk of starting your own organization that might ultimately fail. So yeah, a lot of it comes down to whether you're willing to take this chance. Yeah, and I think this year as well, we're kind of assessing, you're making a project proposal, and you'll get seed funding based on whether your project proposal looks particularly promising. Obviously, that doesn't mean that if you don't get funding from us, you can't start the organization. You definitely can. But yeah, it's probably not going to be 100% this year, but it was last year. So it's definitely over 50%, but yeah, not guaranteed. And with the for-profit question, I think it's definitely something we'd be open to. So we're open to people coming with us to us with their own charity ideas. They don't have to start charities that we recommend. Will also give you funding and training for your own charity idea, but it has to be you have to sufficiently convince us that you've done as much research and it looks as promising as the amount of research we've done. So if you have that, then yeah, definitely. But I guess it's going to be a high bar to prove that your idea is, to make us as confident in your idea as our ideas. But yeah, definitely, if you're interested, then I'd lean on applying rather than not applying, as you can kind of use the application process as a test as to whether you'd be good for this, whether your idea would be good for this. And yeah, so I'd lean on applying for sure.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Won't farmers only adopt the fortification if it raises their economic return, thus reducing costs and increasing the number of animals farmed?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I guess that could be a particularly, that definitely could be possible. I guess, again, you could try and make your support or subsidization conditional on increases in farming not happening, or perhaps if you're seeing movement towards this, you could pivot to a different approach. So this could be like a corporate campaign or a governmental approach, or working with certifiers rather than giving farmers money to make these improvements themselves. As I think if you're not giving them this support, then it'll be less likely that they will like increase their profits and increase their production. Yeah, I would say it's definitely a worry, and something that I guess would be part of being a charity entrepreneur would be trying to notice these things and then pivoting away if you think these are happening, as obviously we definitely don't want that to happen. So yeah.
Thank you. Next question. As a vegan, do you believe in animal agriculture abolition? If yes, why do you promote welfareism?
Yep. Yeah, I definitely do. I think a good thing to point to for this would be David Cohen-Heidi's talk from CARE last year, using welfareism as kind of like these welfare improvements and trying to get people to care more about welfare as like stepping stones to ultimate abolition. I think, yeah, David Cohen-Heidi's talk last year definitely summarizes why we think welfareism is good, even as vegans, as it's one, as we think it's one stepping stone towards abolition. I agree that it can sometimes be disheartening as a vegan to be thinking about, you know, working on chickens and not having their legs be broken, but them still be farmed. It's obviously can be pretty disheartening, but I do ultimately think that these welfare improvements will be stepping stones towards what we ultimately want as vegans, abolition.
Thank you. We have space for a couple of more questions. Okay, I'm not sure if I understand this one correctly. Do you ever have people, once again, do you ever have people who lean differently in terms of right-based approaches, quote unquote, the red team? Your conclusions? Okay, I'm gonna copy that to chat if that's
okay. Yeah,
unclear.
that sounds good.
I'm not really sure what does that mean.
Yeah, I'll have a look now.
Maybe the author could unmute themselves and explain the question a little bit more if it's not comprehensible.
Right, I think I kind of get what they mean. So people maybe who prefer right-based approaches might ultimately not want to start the charities we recommend. I think that might be what they're getting at. Yeah, so far I think we've had people that come from the animal advocacy movement who obviously have been working on welfare for quite a long time now, so are on board with the with welfare as like an approach to improving animal lives. So yeah, I guess we haven't really had that challenge ourselves. I think if it was the case that someone leaned more towards the animal rights, then perhaps they could, you know, we definitely not say that we'd never start like a charity that leans that way. So perhaps they could come with their own charity ideas and then start that if they don't agree with the more welfare focused interventions we recommend.
Thank you. And one last question.
Mm-hmm.
What incentives would producers have to fortify chicken feed? Subsidize will lower costs, but still that is not an incentive to implement such a measure.
Yeah. Yeah, so I guess I think maybe the one main incentive might be the decreased mortality rates that would come from this. So obviously the osteoporosis and the kind of like disease from not having the correct nutrition itself result in mortality, but also if these chickens can't freely move around and access their food and water, then that would also be causing these mortalities as well. So I think the mortality rates would be the main focus of how we'd be getting farmers on board. Yeah, I think that would be the main argument.
Okay, our time is up. So thank you Vicky, for your talk and your answers.